To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meier Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meier Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Hey everyone, Kristin Walker here with Mental Health News Radio, and we are doing one of our roundtable discussions with Dr. Paul Meier. Paul, thanks so much for coming on the show.
I'm thrilled. I love being with you guys.
I was just saying too, how much we've missed you because, we've been busy. You're going to talk about where you've been, but first I want to say hello, Melanie Van.
Hello, Kristin Walker. Hello, Paul Meier.
Hi. I'm Melanie.
So we missed you, Paul.
We did.
Get our Paul thing.
I missed you guys.
We were like, man, if he
I was out of town.
Yeah, you were. And we were thinking, it's Thanksgiving week. If he cancels tonight, that's okay. But man, we miss him. So we hope he doesn't cancel. And you didn't. Yay.
Paul is very grounding. I don't know if anyone else says that to you, Paul, but you're very grounding. I like it.
Yeah, for me too. I've said this on other shows. Instead of doing what would Jesus do, which is perfectly acceptable to do, a lot of times when we're in discussions about how do really great men behave, we go, well, what would Paul do?
We do. Whenever Kristin's questioning anything, I'll be like, Kristin, think of how Paul Meier would respond to this. Would he even become remotely close to responding like this? And then she's like, no, you're right.
You guys need to get to know my wife better. It might surprise you. It might surprise you what I'd say under certain circumstances.
Well, anytime she wants to be a guest, she's welcome to come on.
Exactly. We'd love to have her on.
Yeah, that'd be fun. But tell our listeners where you've been, that we missed a show. It was for a very, very good reason. So before we get into our topic tonight, give us all an update on where you've been, Paul.
Well, I got a real surprise. I got an email, and at first, my little sister runs the Meier Clinic chain. Let me explain that. And we've got a national chain of nonprofit clinics, and we've been getting $2 million a year grants from the government all the way since the Bush administration and all the way through the Obama administration and continue to get it now to minister to the poor in the Chicago area to help them with building their families. And it's in a secular way, but, we're as Christian as we can be without offending anybody, but in a secular way. And so the government knows about us, but my little sister runs the clinics, and she and I both, we got emails saying, we want you to come to the White House. And we thought, this has got to be a joke. You know what I mean? You'd think, but she answered it and then called the number, and it turned out it really was the White House. And they wanted us to fly to Washington, D.C. to meet with Vice President Pence and Kellyanne Conway and Mercedes Schlapp and several other, the head of Health and Human Services and about 4 or 5 leaders to talk about mental health and to give our opinion on what the government ought to be doing for mental health. And I wasn't the only one invited. There were about 40 psychiatrists, psychologists, and leaders in the field that were invited. There were even in that group, there were even a few, 2 or 3, I think, pastors of enormous churches, to give their input on what kind of problems they see in their churches and things too. And so it was a real honor, and we were just able to interact. We met for 4 straight hours and just interacted with each other and gave our thoughts and suggestions and things like that. They even had their tax guy come in. I couldn't figure out why would they want their tax guy to come and talk to mental health leaders, But I had a suggestion for them. I said, one of the stupidest laws that our government has is that if you get married, you pay a penalty you pay higher taxes.
Yeah.
And that started under Nixon, believe it or not, and then continued under the other presidents. And then when George W. was president, he dropped that. But then when Obama became president, he put it right back in. And I said, what happens is, it makes people not want to get married because they have to pay higher taxes. If they live together, they pay lower taxes than if they get married. So you're encouraging there to be a lot more single parent families and more broken homes and children who grow up with problems. And I said, it's really a bad idea. We really need to get rid of that. And they said that they were already, the tax guy said they were already planning on getting rid of that. And
Nice.
and if this tax plan passes in the House and Congress, they've already passed the House, but if it passes in the Senate, there won't be any marital tax.
And you will have been a part of that, Paul.
Well, I reinforced that to make sure that they did that,
Good. It's so amazing that, of course, we get to talk to you every week and that you would get invited to go be a part of this. Were there people there that you hadn't met and were just excited to speak to?
Most of them I didn't know, but Dr. Henry Cloud is the author of the Boundaries books, and I trained him when he was a student.
Yeah,
I trained him when he was a student, and he's been on national television a number of times when there's crises and things. They interview him to get his opinion on how to handle the crises, and he was there, and it was good to see him. I hadn't seen him in about 15 years, 10 or 15 years. We used to do radio together for years. So it was really good to catch up with him. And Dr. Dobson was there, and I know him very well. James Dobson, that was with Focus on the Family for many years. And I used to go there to Focus on the Family 3 days every 6 months at my own expense to help them out and develop a magazine for physicians and help write a child rearing book that sold probably 1 million copies. And the doctors that wrote it didn't get any royalties or anything. It all went to charitable causes.
Fantastic.
So it was good to catch up with some of the people that I knew, but most of the people I didn't know. I knew Daniel Amen from the Amen Clinics. He's actually not a psychiatrist. Well, he might be a psychiatrist and
I think he is. He was
scientist, a neurologist.
Yeah, he's slated to come on our show, I believe.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
He's brilliant. He's a real brilliant guy. He more or less popularized the SPECT scans, where they measure the blood flow through your brain and can help with diagnoses and things like that. And I went out to California to get my brain SPECT scanned to find out what kind of ADD I had and get some ideas, for medications that I might need and things. And he knew me, and so he invited me. He's Lebanese. He invited me to his mother's house, and she picked some homemade Lebanese food and things like that.
Oh, man.
And when the SPECT scan came off the graph, most doctors would read it first and then meet with you the next day to tell you the results. As it was coming off, he was just looking at it and thinking out loud with me as it was coming off. And he said, "Oh, you're not very good at golf, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm horrible at it. I took lessons and my teachers even gave up. I practiced for hours and I just can't do it." And I said, "How can you tell?" And he said, "Probably when I was 5 or 6 years old, I must have had a little concussion or something. Because he showed me there's a little hole in my cerebellum, the hand-eye. He said, you might be good at some sports, but sports that require really fine hand-eye motor coordination, you'd have problems with." And I said, "Oh, now I got a good excuse." And, he could tell me, he said, "You've got sleep apnea, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, how can you tell?" And he showed me little holes in my brain that are caused by sleep apnea. He said, "Be sure to use that machine." And so he told me the story of my life by looking at my SPECT scan. He was there to offer advice, and different people were there to give advice on heroin addiction and how to get people help in that regard, not just to dry them out. You don't just send them to a rehab and dry them out, because 95% of the time they're going to go back on it. You have to treat the underlying cause. So anyway, I don't want to, that's not our topic for today, but
well, we wanted
those are just some of the things.
Yeah,
those are some of the things that came up though, and it was really a great experience, and they want us to get together several times in the future as they're making their plans. But I was really impressed that the government really, really, really wants to do a good job of helping people. They were very concerned and willing to spend money on mental health and want to make sure, because there's some congressmen and senators that want to exclude mental health and just pay for physical health. it would save a lot of money, they think. In the long run, it'll save money to treat mental health, because a lot of the, if not most, physical illnesses come from stress and psychological related causes, and so treating mental health is just as important as treating physical health.
That's so fantastic. I told you this when you told us about it, that I feel so much better about our current administration that they're doing this, that they'd have you there and that they do care. That feels so good, because what we get in the media isn't, we don't even know who to trust anymore, what we're hearing from this place.
Harvard did a study, and Harvard's not exactly conservative,
Right.
But Harvard did a study on the media as regards to their coverage of the Trump administration, and they showed that the media, what they reported was 91% negative, and 9% positive and 91% negative, and even Fox News was about 50-50, half negative and half positive, because on Fox they always have people from both sides presenting their opinions. But so people that just listen to regular news get a very slanted view of what's going on in the government, and not that everything that's going on in the government is good.
Right.
As our topic for today, we'll discuss
exactly
sexual harassment.
Exactly. Yeah. Good segue into that. And, look, I'm all for any government that puts mental health at the top of their initiative. So yay for that. Yay that they were smart enough to have you there. And yeah, we're going to talk about sexual harassment. It's on the minds, lips, everything of everybody right now. And it's certainly been triggering. We've gotten so many emails from listeners about it. We've done a couple of shows, and we were like, we need to have a conversation about this with men, what they think about this and the causes and what this does to victims. And so you, Paul, are the one tonight, we've told our listeners, sometimes we come up with what we're going to talk about 2 seconds before I hit record, and you're the one that said, hey, why don't we talk about this? So I want to just point that out to our listeners. This was Paul's idea. And Paul, lead us off on, what are your thoughts on what the heck is going on right now?
Okay, I'll just say a few things, and then we always do the best radio programs when the three of us are interacting, and each coming up with our own ideas and interacting on those. But I think that this whole sexual harassment thing, I guess it started with Hollywood producer Weinstein.
Oh, yep.
And that made such news. Then people started coming out and talking about a lot of famous people that had been guilty of sexual harassment, and then it came out that the United States Senate and Congress have, in the last 20 years, have spent $17 million paying off women who have been harassed by congressmen and senators, and that there's something like 246 cases. So that's about $1 million a year that's been spent to hush those types of things. And Trump came out today and said he wants all the names exposed. He wants the whole truth to come out about what happened, who did what, even though there's Republicans and Democrats that have been guilty of that. And so I
he's
actually
been accused of that himself. I mean,
I know. Yeah, he's been accused of it himself, mostly by, well, I better not get too political, but most accusers are probably telling the truth.
Yeah.
There's some, I'm glad that it's not as bad. A few years ago, if college men got accused by any female, they were considered guilty until proven innocent, and that's wrong too.
Right.
Everyone's innocent until proven guilty, and an accusation doesn't necessarily mean it's true. But women have been taken for granted for thousands of years.
Yes.
Thousands of years. And they still are. And so there's a lot of women that, especially when a man becomes powerful in one regard or another, for a variety of reasons that I'm sure we'll get into, they'll take advantage of women, especially younger women that are more vulnerable. And then the younger women are in a dilemma because they know they'll either get fired or won't, move their way up the ladder as an actress or in politics or whatever field they're in the news, media, whatever job they're in, even regular jobs. So if they don't put up with harassment, they're the ones that get punished.
Right.
And I think what's going on right now is a wonderful, wonderful movement that's going to shake up the morals of our society. Like when women got the right to vote, that was a big shakeup. When the slaves were set free after the Civil War, that was a big movement. Martin Luther King doing his wonderful talks and sacrificing his own life and things like that to help shake up freedom, more racial justice and all that sort of thing was a big movement. So there have been big movements in our society, throughout history. Jesus coming to earth and preaching and dying on the cross was, probably the biggest movement of all time in my prejudiced opinion. But I think that's what's going on right now is a movement where women are going to be more strong and more assertive and more willing to speak up, and where men won't get away with harassing them and using them and treating them like objects like they have for so many years. Now, men who do that are getting canned. They're losing their jobs.
Yeah.
A big news man lost his job.
Charlie Rose just happened. Yep. Charlie Rose.
I don't want to mention any names, but I'll let you do that.
Yeah, I mean,
So I think it's a big
there,
movement. That's the beginning of what I wanted to say. I think it'd be good to get into what types of people do it. And occasionally women will be guilty of sexual harassment too, but I think it's a real minority. I don't think that happens nearly as often as men doing it to women.
Agreed.
Or men doing it to other young males.
Right.
There have been some congressmen and other people that have been
Kevin Spacey
accused. Yeah, Kevin Spacey, who've been accused of taking advantage of teenage boys and things like that. That's just as bad. So
yeah,
let's kick it off.
Let's kick it off. Think? Yeah, Melanie, we've done our shows on this, and you and I both have experienced this. So I'll have my turn, but I want to ask you. What are your initial thoughts about what is happening right now?
I guess my initial gut feelings are one of relief. I thought about that the other day, and it made me think about the internal, not always spoken, and maybe not even awareness that the oppression that women feel in our society.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think about it. I don't feel oppressed, but just the fact that I felt relief, and the more this was coming out and the movement that I do feel like is happening, it really made me think about the reality of women's role in society and how we're continued to not be treated fairly. We still don't make as much money as men and those types of things. So relief is one of the first things that comes to mind, that not only people are going to get support, because a lot of people do suffer in silence and they feel alone and they think they're the only ones. They feel guilty. And, when you hear about one woman coming out and then 20 others coming beside her and saying, hey, this happened to me too, by the same person, the validation that must bring to all of the women, that in and of itself, just from a counselor's perspective, is so incredibly healing, to not have to live in secrecy, because, secrecy hurts our souls. And the truth will set you free. So I think about all the women that are living in bondage because of these types of things, and they don't have a safe place, or feel they don't have a safe place to reveal these things that have happened to them. So for me, this is just about freedom. I agree with Paul totally that hopefully this is kind of a moralistic shakeup for anyone that's a predator, male or female, that you can't do these things and get away with it, that we don't have to have these people that we call, quote, whistleblowers. We can just have human beings that tell the truth, which is what I would like to see happen. And again, feel safe speaking up about, these things that have happened to them. And I just think it's beautiful. And I'm so happy that, again, And I don't want to make it a man-woman. And I do think it's definitely true that women don't sexually assault others as much as men, but just in general, I mean, we just interviewed Matt Hoffus on the show, or Paphos. I'm not quite sure how he pronounces that, Kristin. So he definitely knows what this feels like. So there are just so many victims.
Yes.
There's so many victims living in silence, and it ruins your lives. You know, this is the invisible wound. Sexual assault is an invisible wound that we can't see. And I think it's debilitating. I think it's the cause of depression.
Yep.
And anxiety for so many people. And it can suck the life out of you. So I love that this topic in general is just being brought to light, and that it's more than just a really cheesy video that you have to watch at work. Because basically that's the only time it's ever really talked about. You know what I mean? I think it opens up conversation. I was having a conversation with a male the other day, and they were talking about how, and it's funny because I've talked to several males that are genuinely shocked at how many, quote, creeps there are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just, I mean, I have, spoken with several that are like, wow, I just had no idea that so many men were doing these types of things, like who, just not understanding and having the insight into what a predator is. And then on the other side of it is, I had one male saying, well, it makes me double think in the office when my, associate comes in. Should I even say that her hair looks nice? I think men get people get paranoid.
Right.
And what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. So then they just don't say anything, and then things get awkward. Like people get scared to even say, I like your dress, or, you know what I mean? That was kind of the conversation I was having with the guy. So I think it can just cause some anxiety. And that may happen for a little while, but I think eventually it'll swing back to the middle, and people can just have an understanding of what respect is. And I think that's a big piece of it, is lack of respect for people and for human beings in general. I think that's where predators work from. And then also just that power. It's that power piece. It's that part of men and women and people that are in sin that want to abuse and use their power and make others feel less than. And it's just a nasty thing that we do, and I'm just thrilled that we're getting this out in the open.
I'm not surprised by how many, being a psychiatrist, because I know I do new workups almost every day, and I see so many women who were even sexually abused growing up, and how often it is when it's the father-daughter, for example, the father sexually abusing the daughter, and the mom finds out, how often it is that the mom will blame the daughter for seducing her, the 10-year-old daughter for seducing her husband. Yep. And in those cases, I think the mom is just as abusive as the dad is. And there was a study in the Chicago area that showed that 1 out of 20 girls polled privately said that their fathers had sex with them.
Yeah.
So 1 out of 20, their fathers had sex with them.
Yep.
And 1 out of 50 boys, their moms had sex with them.
Yep.
So 1 out of 20 girls and 1 out of 50 boys. And according to some studies, maybe a third, somewhere between a third and a fourth of all the women in America have had cases of sexual harassment of one sort or another. I mean, some were severe, and not all of them were raped, but some of them, were just harassed in various ways. And it shook me up too, because I haven't harassed or abused, sexually molested anybody or abused anybody, but the attitudes in our culture are to objectify women, and instead of seeing them as your sister and a fellow soul, which most of the time I've done, but there were times I look back in my own life and remember, comments that we made back in high school about certain girls, and in college. And I hate to admit this, on the radio. I hope people will forgive me, but I remember in college, 3 or 4 guys standing up on a hill after supper, after young men and young women, college students were coming out of the dining common, and as the girls walked by, we were rating them 1 to 10. you know, and we were seeing them as objects.
Yep.
You know, I mean, once we dated any of them and got to know them, we treated them with respect and dignity, and you know, we didn't take advantage of them or anything like that. But still, that, you know, seeing women as objects, that's something I've been guilty of in my secret thought life many times. And so what's happening now is really convicting me of some of my own lousy attitudes in that regard. So it's shaking me up in a good way.
Yeah, it's first of all a brave, Paul, for you to say that. And that's the piece that's been interesting for me about watching what's going on, because, you know, my biological father did molest me, and boy, did that set me up for a lifetime of all kinds of just awful stuff going on, because that's what I thought love meant, that men get to do that. My dad was even part of a group that actually exists today that is about how it is absolutely a father's right to be the first man to have sex with his daughter. And my dad was part of that group.
Horrible.
And my uncles were, not all of them, but my uncles were sexual predators and so on. But, you know, and I've talked about that a lot on the show.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meier of the Meier Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meier Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
But what I am interested in right now is the whole topic, but also the topic around men who are not predators. Okay, these are men. Some of these men are my friends. They're not predators, and yet they have done things, said things that they are not proud of, and are aware now in a way that they have never been before, that those things are not the right way to be. And these are men that I love. I had a conversation with my ex-husband, who is the most female empowered, you know, how could he not be being with me, but
You taught him right. You brought him up right.
And his mother too. She was a bra burner before you ever got into that. But I mean, just even, you know, he and I have had discussions about, you know, Chris, I have said things. He's never touched a woman inappropriately or anything like that. He has me at times, but of course I was his wife and I'm me. So I would say, hey, excuse me. He always did it in front of his dad, because I know that's how his dad behaved about women. And I was able to say to him, hey, you're acting like this around your dad. It's not okay. Don't you ever, ever touch me like that again. So, you know, I was able to say that to him, and he would stop and go, oh my God, I am so sorry. But that's the kind of what I'm seeing now, even with like my close male friends, that I'm talking to them and they'll say, yeah, well, you know, I went to the doctor and of course I go in for a checkup and it has to be this hot nurse that comes in and she's blah, blah, blah. And I've said to different men, you know, even my close friends that will say things like this, and I'll say, can you rethink, you know, how you just describe women on an everyday basis, like how you think about them? Because when you say things like a hot woman, you're totally objectifying, and you're a nice person. You're a really nice person. I love you. I'm friends with you, and I wouldn't be friends with you if you were a predator. So just rethink how society tells you and has taught you to think about women, because it isn't good. It isn't right. And when you do that, you're not a predator. These particular men, you're not a predator, but you're part of this culture that is oppressing and has oppressed women forever. So that's the piece that I'm, you know, of course I'm focused on the others. And there have been men that have done all kinds of just not great things to me, and I'm a fighter about that stuff, but and I still have a lot of anger. I have a lot of anger about a man that runs a software company in mental health who felt it was completely appropriate to come up and rub my shoulders and rub up against me and do all kinds of things. And that caused me to have so much quote unquote bad behavior because of what happened. And then I reported it and everybody took his side and blamed me. I became mentally ill and I didn't behave in a wonderful way at all because I was traumatized. And instead of everyone looking at who did the behavior, who was in the power position there, because it wasn't me, instead of looking at that and saying, oh my gosh, Kristin, this is why you're having problems and mental health issues and why you're suicidal, my reaction to what he did that was horrible was used against me and in service of, look at her, she's crazy, he did nothing wrong. And it's not to call this guy out because he'll never apologize, and the women that still work with him will never apologize or take responsibility, but it's more of that, yes, women have acted out in very not great ways to what's happened to them, but how the heck were we supposed to behave when we're put in that kind of a position, you know?
Yeah. And what's amazing, we live here in America and we see all these things going on here, but it's in the rest of the world, it's much, much worse.
Oh God, yes.
Than it is here. In most of the rest of the world, even in Europe, I think worse than it is here. But for
Absolutely.
sure, in the other, in South America and Africa and other continents, even,
Oh yeah.
it's a lot worse than it is here. In India, just not too long ago, a few hundred years ago, if one of the leaders died, they have a funeral pyre and they burn the body, and they would throw the wife on the body because why would she want to live without him?
Right.
So if a man who was a big, whatever they call their big leaders, died, then they would throw the live wife to burn on the funeral pyre with him, because their attitude was, why would she want to live without her husband being here? And that's how bad it can get. And I'm not putting down Muslims. I have a lot of clients who are just wonderful, loving Muslims, but in the radical Muslim faith, there's just horrible treatment of women too, and ISIS and groups like that. Just the Somalians and different places where they kidnap girls and make them into wives when they're 10, 11, 12 years old, and things like that. It's just so the harassment of women is unbelievably horrible.
And it has been going
and unbelievably worse in other countries than it is here.
Yeah, and it's so funny how America is spearheading this, talking about it, when, yes, it's awful here. Okay, it is awful here, but it is far worse, as you said, Paul. It is far worse in other countries. But the spearheading of the conversation of this is happening here, which is fantastic. It's absolutely.
It's like a revival.
Yeah.
It's like a revival. I think it's great. Like, Kristin, what happened to you? If that would have happened a year from now and you would have brought it up, the guy would have got canned. He would have got fired.
Well, he would have been ousted from his own company and charges, and the charity that he supports, that I reported to them, that I did tons of volunteer work for, that I said to them, they asked me to come to an event, and I said, I'm not comfortable coming to that event with my therapy dog if he's going to be there because of issues I've had with him regarding sexual harassment. And they said nothing and wrote up a great review about his company instead. And I think if that happened, if what he did to me today, or like you said, a year from now, that reaction would not have happened. And this charity is run by a woman. I mean, it's like, I'm not trying to belabor, what happened with this guy, even though I have every right to. I'm just saying people aren't or we're finally getting to the nuts and bolts of what this is, what it causes. It causes mental illness in the people that have this perpetrated upon them, and then they're blamed for acting out of what happened to them. And the perpetrator of it just walks around like, there's another crazy woman making up stories. I didn't do anything wrong. She took it the wrong way.
And in our culture, another thing that's coming out that's been surprising to a lot of people, not to me, but been surprising to a lot of people, is that the women and the men throughout the last 50 to 60 years who have fought the most for women's rights and women equality and all that are the most guilty of sexual harassment
what the heck is
and
that
of
about?
defending each other. Men, I mean, like Bill Clinton. I'll mention. I'm not afraid to mention Bill Clinton.
Why not?
He's had so many women accusing him of things you can't even count them, and including of rape. And yet, because he's pro-woman, supposedly, in his politics, the women news commentators and the women political leaders and everybody stood up for him, and in fact, they condemned the women who were accusing him and made fun of them, called them bimbos, and that, it's horrible the way women sometimes treat other women who have been harassed.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I can't explain how that happened. I can't explain that. I can't figure that one out as a psychiatrist, how women would defend abusers, and then say that they're for women's rights.
Yeah, I don't. It's like these preachers that go out there and talk about, the sin of divorce and infidelity and molestation, and then you find out that they're, they've got child pornography on their computer. There's, to me, that's a psychological phenomenon of, a typical predator where, they're hiding behind, what their worst actions are,
Oh, I have some thoughts, Paul, on why women do that. I think there's a couple of things we can look at. And before I do that, I just want to thank you for bringing light and putting it on all of our hearts and our listeners' hearts about, what women experience that overseas in countries where it's so much worse. So hopefully that'll kind of be on our listeners' hearts that they can pray and put some positive energy into. But one piece of it is there's two things that came to mind. One of them is just the concept of the flying monkey. So when you have a narcissist that's highly manipulative, they can manipulate people to become flying monkeys. So to me, these are the people that come to the defense of a perpetrator. The second thing is,
what is a flying monkey, by the way?
Yeah, tell Paul that.
Yeah. Oh, this is a big term or word when, and I guess more modern talk of narcissism, Paul, where if you have a narcissist and they kind of have their little crew around them that will do anything they say and take up for them and do whatever they want. Yeah. That is a reference to the Wizard of Oz with all the flying monkeys and the Wicked Witch.
And think of this, and Melanie, this is the only.
You know what I'm talking about, Paul?
Yeah.
So the flying monkeys are the people that do whatever the narcissist wants.
Yeah. So think of Charles Manson. I just want the women that, and this is a horrible example, but this is exactly what flying monkeys at their worst do. Charles Manson didn't commit the actual crime of the murders physically, but his flying monkeys did. You
get women to do that.
Exactly, of what a flying
that is a perfect example. So I think that's part of it. And then I think the other part of it is just a lot of denial, Paul. I think a lot of these women have probably been perpetrated against themselves and have not stood up for themselves. And so instead of standing up for what they should, they stand up because they want to continue the secrecy. It's like this dedication to secrecy and oppression because they're uncomfortable with maybe what they've experienced coming out, or maybe they haven't told, this, that, and the other, or why they come to the aid. I mean, Kristin, I don't know if you've heard me talk about this on a show, Paul, but my uncle abused me when I was 5 years old until the time I was 10 years old. And his mother, who was my grandmother, said that I seduced him at 5, which was just and it was because I was too pretty. I was too pretty. That was why I was abused, was because of that. And so, and she came to the defense of her son that was doing these horrible things knowingly in her home, and blamed it on me. So there's a woman that comes, and I know from our family history that she had also, I mean, this woman got married when she was 15 and her husband was 30. And so, my grandfather, there was a 15-year difference there. And I know that she had also had sexual assault in her childhood. So I think a lot of it just gets to the real, deep root of denial.
Yeah.
Of what's going on. And it just comes out kind of the opposite way of why they come, to defense of these people. And also, narcissists are often such womanizers that they don't want to lose the attention of the perpetrator, because there's something in it for them. There's something in it for them, for the person to continue to be able to harass women. And maybe they just like the compliments, or maybe they're getting something out of it. So I think it's just this real deep-seated issue of why women come to these. It's like a cult. I really feel like it's like a cult. Like, why does anyone listen to a leader of a cult? It's just this highly manipulative thing that happens, and people that are maybe not as strong in character, or just as strong as in will, are not able to not be pulled in by these highly manipulative perpetrators. So those are my thoughts about that. The other thing I just wanted to say was, Kristin and I talked about women being objectified on a show we did with Shahida Arabi. And Paul, I 100% agree with you. Women, we objectify women all the time. I mean, I don't even think we understand as a society how deep this goes, and how much we objectify people. And I just made the silly example of, when you're watching the morning show or any show, and they'll bring on a bunch of different sized women, and they'll talk about what shirt to wear if you're heavy chested, what pants to wear if you have a larger rear end. And it's like, that is the most objectifying thing to do.
Do they bring men out and tell them what clothes to wear if they have a big butt?
Exactly. That's what I said. That's what I said. I was like, are they doing, like, if a man has small calves, here, wear these jeans that have push-up calves in them. I mean, this doesn't even happen, right? And so it's just such a double standard, and it's just so silly. And then
deep in our culture. It's deep.
It is deep. It is so deep. And I mean, to this day, and I hate I do it, but I do, I will buy medium shirts that don't fit, because the small might be a little bit too revealing around the chest area. And if I'll buy a shirt like that, especially for work experiences, because I know what's going to happen when I wear the smaller garment. I'm going to get stared at more. No one's going to look me in the eyes. And so every day my life is affected by this. Every single day, the decisions that I make,
such a good point.
There's a little voice in the back of my head, that dictates how I live my life in so many little ways. So it runs deep. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. There's something real important that I thought of just a few minutes ago that is real important for me to share. And that is that what's happening right now makes men look bad and women look good. And the MMPI, I want to give a little evidence before I say something that's going to make everybody ticked off at me. But the MMPI is the main test used by psychiatrists and psychologists around the world. And it's been given to millions of people. It's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. It's like 560 true-false questions, and there aren't any right or wrong answers, but it reveals the degree of narcissism and the degree of paranoia and the degree of social shyness and introversion, and it measures 26 different aspects of your personality. And there's a scale on there called the PD scale, which is the sociopathic scale, that really measures really how sinful you are in one way to put it, and how narcissistic you are, how likely you are to take advantage of other people. And men and women come out exactly equal. In fact, women come out 1 point higher than men do. And men and women, but it's not statistically significant. They're statistically they're the same, but women actually even come out a point higher than men do in being narcissistic. So sin is not something that's uniquely male.
Right.
Men and women sin equally. It's just that there's different ways that men and women sin. Women might sin more by things that they say, that are catty to other women, or I don't know how women sin,
Right.
But men's sins are more likely to be sexual. Men are bigger than women, and they have androgen, and that doesn't justify anything, but men's sins are more likely to be sexual in nature than women's are, although women, whenever there's an affair, there's a man and a woman having the affair,
right.
in most cases. So, but I want to defend men that we're, as men, we're sinful, but women are equally sinful. It might just be in different ways. So I don't want that. This is a wonderful movement. It's going to shake up society. It's going to make us aware of a lot of things in our own attitudes that need some correction. But one thing that I'm afraid of is that it could make it look like women are good, men are bad, and that's not. We're all a mixture. We're all a mixed bag. We're all good in some ways, and we're all sinful in some ways. We all have a mixture of things going on inside of us.
Agreed. I don't think that I think that there's going to be a pendulum swing. And right now the pendulum swing is way over on the female side, because we have been putting up with this crap for 1,000
And it needs to be. It needs to be.
Years. Yeah. And there will be some men that are caught in the crossfire of this that really are not predators, but boy, did they behave badly and have made their amends. And that's just going to happen in this pendulum swing. And like Melanie said, it's going to find its way back, to hopefully a healthier place where equality actually exists. But I'll tell you, it has made me think about the ways that I've objectified myself, the ways I've objectified other women, and the ways that I've objectified men. But I still had to sit back and go, have I done any of the things that the men who have harassed and abused me in this way that has the sexual connotation behind it? And the answer is no. So
yeah.
It's interesting to sit back and think about that. And I always like to come to a positive place about this too, because this has been very triggering, very, very, very triggering. I've certainly had some trauma, come up about this, and Melanie has as well. A lot of listeners have, but this still needs to be discussed. And I want to throw one thing out to all the women who didn't shut up. And I'm including Melanie and I in that, and many of our listeners. We really, and I'm not doing this in a narcissistic way either, we really do need to give ourselves and the men who've supported us and the women who've supported us a huge pat on the back for not shutting up.
Amen.
Even in that environment where this guy was doing what he was doing to me, I saw him doing it to another woman, actually 2 other women, and I went to him on their behalf and said, you need to stop this behavior. Even though they turned around and harassed me, blamed me, blah, 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 blah. And you know what? in my worst moments of, my dark nights of the soul, because we all have them, or we should anyway, because it really keeps you balanced and humble. One of the things that helps me get through those dark nights is that's who I am. I didn't shut up.
Yeah. I think it's, I'm sitting here thinking about why people that speak out are deemed crazy or not well. This is what I don't understand as a clinician. When someone's been perpetrated against, why is it that we expect them to come forward with the stories without emotion, without passion, and level-headed? That is not a normal response. They should be upset. They should be crazy acting, and they should be wounded and broken. And the fact that to have any credibility that we have to act any differently is just backwards. It is just absolutely backwards that happens. I mean, I just think it's absurd. Obviously, there's a deeper root there of that, and I just don't understand why we, and I think that's why so many of these people that come out and speak are made fun of. Yep. Is because when they come out, they're upset, they're tearful, they're hurtful, they're meek, they don't come across as a strong person. Well, why would they when they've been perpetrated against? And it's really just this dynamic that the perpetrators take advantage of because they're weak, because they've been hurt. And it's gross. It's disgusting. And
I had a patient. Go ahead. I had a patient who had been abused by I think 36 different men growing up. She grew up just with her sister and her mom, and her mom ran a motel. The girls, would clean the rooms, and the mom expected the girls to get abused by male people that were in the hotel, and she told me. And she got really healthy. In fact, she became a psychologist, a therapist, and has done real well. But she told me that after you get abused a few times, you feel like it's inevitable. You just become passive, and you put up with it. And predators can, pick you out, and they can walk into a bar and know who's going to give in to them, because. Yep. You get so used to getting abused that you just consider it inevitable. And if you were kidnapped and put in a cage, you'd be furious because you'd be out of control. It's not fun to be out of control. For somebody else to control you is just infuriating. But when you're being harassed and being sexually harassed or abused or things like that, and you're in a situation where you're going to lose your job if you, or not, move your way up the totem pole if you speak out against it, then you're like somebody that's in a cage. You're trapped too. Oh. You feel out of control, and that makes you furious.
Oh, that's such a good point, Paul. Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. It's like these things. It's like when you take a woman who is coming forward, or anyone who comes forward, but especially women. Actually, I've never heard of a man having to go through this who's been raped, but I could be completely wrong. So please forgive me if I am. Listeners, email me and tell me I'm wrong, and that's fine. But when a woman comes forward that she's been raped, and then she's put on trial, and she's asked, "What were you wearing? Why were you?" All those things, and
they just ridicule you.
And I look at that like these. Two of the men that sexually harassed me in my 40s, one was a former NFL player who was married, and one was this business owner who was married. Because of how I was brought up, and this is something I talked about with my therapist, I actually believed that I loved them after they started harassing me. That's how, because that's how why wouldn't I think that? My therapist was exactly, that's how I looked at men, and there's been so much work that I've done, personal work, to realize that ain't love, honey. And yet the connotation with both of those experiences was, maybe I'm using the wrong word, was that, oh yeah, look at what Kristin went through, because I've been so open about it on my show. She's admitting that she has this past with men, so of course she thought that we were being inappropriate, and we really weren't. It's still blame it on the person that it happened to. There's no responsibility. I even complained about one of them to a conference venue and said, and I was one of several women who had complained about this guy, and I just found out he opened up a treatment center for women, and it makes me sick to my stomach that this man who is a predator, was a predator to me, is now opening a treatment center for women. Now, maybe in the time that I've known him, he got help and isn't behaving that way anymore with women. Maybe my speaking out against him made him get into therapy. I don't know. I haven't stayed in touch, but it still makes me sick to my stomach that this, is being advertised. Come to my treatment center for women.
85, according to psychiatry research, about 85% of our personality is formed by our 6th birthday.
Oh, God.
And that doesn't mean we can't change. About 50% by the 3rd birthday. But your main attitude toward men and women and toward marriage and even toward God, dear heavenly version of my earthly father, about 85% of the way we look at ourselves and men and women in general is formed by our 6th birthday. So the early childhood experience and how you see your mom and dad interacting with each other and how they look at you and treat you, but most of what's going on in our heads as adults was going on as children. And one other thing I want to say too, there's a one personality kind of problem that we treat as psychiatrists are explosive males, and explosive males are actually really nice guys most of the time. They're very nice to their wives and nice to other women, but then once every 3 months, some little thing will trigger them and they'll explode and maybe push their wife or do something, and then a sociopath wouldn't repent, but an explosive male would repent and be really sorry and horribly sorry and guilt-ridden and apologize and hate himself for doing it and all that sort of thing. But then three months later, he might do that again. And explosive males, when they get treated, turn out to be really nice almost all the time. But most explosive males were sexually abused by other men when they were young.
Oof,
and for some reason, a male getting sexually abused, when a male's 4 or 5, 6 years old and gets sexually abused by an older boy or by the father or an uncle or somebody like that, they feel controlled and they feel angry and they have a lot of pent up anger and tend to stuff it. And so every now and then, and they may grow up to be wonderful people, but every now and then they'll explode. They'll have an explosive personality where they let it out. And then they feel they're different from a sociopath who will abuse women and not feel guilty, but they feel horribly guilty. And with therapy, they do great. They do really great.
There are men I know, there's men I've interviewed that have done, one gentleman that just came on who's, we're kind of becoming friends, and he was in one of the worst domestic violence cases in the history of the United States against his ex-wife, who he's friends with today. He was in prison, and he has spent the last 30 years, going into domestic violence centers, working with women and saying, these are the signs to look out for. And, I really like this man. And he bravely came on the show and told his story. And most everyone can be redeemed if they'll do the freaking work, and it's a whole other show to talk about, women.
But most predators will not repent.
Exactly.
They'll act like they do. Most predators will continue to do what they do even after they get caught.
Yep.
And they found out, like with child molesters, if you catch a man who has, or a woman, who has molested a child, they usually have done that to 100. If they've done it to one, they've probably done it to 100.
Oh, I know my dad.
Not just one incident.
I know my dad kept on doing it. I know he did. It made me sick later in life, thinking, oh God, if he had stepchildren, I always wanted to know, but he disappeared, so I couldn't find him. But man, I did a lot of running around trying and save them, and I know that he did. And Melanie, I know that went on, with the person that did that to you too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just want to empower listeners to take your power back.
Yeah.
Take your power back.
Now
When that
is the
shift
time.
happens inside of you, it can make a huge difference in your life. You know, my abuse stopped when I was 10, and it stopped because one day I literally stood up to him and said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. And I stood there firm, and he looked at me like I was crazy, and he was shocked, and I turned around and walked out of the room, and he never touched me again. And that was an empowering moment, even though I was 10 years old. But, you know, it continued on with my brother, unfortunately, until he was in his teens, because I'm sure the shame that was attached with his abuse was just too much for him to stand up to. So point being, find a way to take your power back, and don't let, you know, whoever has assaulted you keep that piece of you. You know, find a way to get it back. So
Therapy is a great place to start with that.
It is, for sure.
Well, we could definitely go on about this subject, and we may talk about it more in other shows, because it certainly deserves to be talked about. But first, I want to say, Paul, thank you so much for being a male, first of all, who is respectful to women, and for being the one that said to us tonight, hey, let's talk about this.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, I'm happy that this is happening right now, because it's about time. There needs to be a shakeup and a revival. And there's, you know, again, some of the people that preached the most against harassment were the most guilty of defending it and doing it. And that's a reaction formation, people that preach, people that, you know, during the Prohibition era, where all drinking was, all alcohol was forbidden, and women and men went around just condemning it, preaching against it, and having, you know, demonstrations and all that sort of thing, were usually the ones that were the most alcoholic in secret.
Absolutely. And, you know,
people have what's called reaction formation.
Yeah, that's something to Google. Absolutely. And I think for our listeners, you know, do what you need to do now to feel empowered, whatever that may be. I mean, right now for me, there's some things going on in my life that are just opening up for me, that are going to lead to some personal freedom for me from a lot of emotional baggage I've carried around. Some of it has to do with what we talked about tonight. The bulk of it is. And one of the ways that I'm going to empower myself for the next, at least till the end of this year, is, and this is just me, I'm not saying anyone else should do this, but I'm not wearing makeup anymore. I'm going to wear clothes that are comfortable. I'm not going to put myself out as an ornament at all. And I'm not going to shame myself for the way that my body looks. And I'm going to do this in a very purposeful, mindful way for at least the next 6 weeks, maybe longer. Just to cleanse a lot of this toxic stuff that's coming out in our society finally, yay, but to also cleanse it for me. I'm not saying that I think that wearing makeup and all that stuff is bad. I just know that what I need to do to help heal me about a lot of this stuff is I need to learn how to honor myself as a human being, not as an object. And that's my path. Not saying anyone else should do it, but we should all, listeners, all of you, find something that you can do that honors your humanness, not your femaleness, not your maleness, just your humanness, however little or big it may be. Do that during this time and speak up. Now is the time.
Yeah, I agree. And also just wanted to say, you know, most companies have an HR department, and I feel like these days especially that might be a safe place to start, is just going to HR. And In my understanding, if you go to HR and complain of sexual harassment, you will not be named to the perpetrator. I think the perpetrator is brought in. If it's nothing that's really offensive, they're brought in, they're told about the behavior, they're asked to change it, and then they're sent right back into work if it's something just horrific like exposing yourself or something. So there is some secrecy that's involved with most HR programs. And I'm sure there's other organizations out there that you can reach out to or look up. We'll have to try to attach some of those to the show, Kristin.
We will.
Other nonprofits that can help women get on the right course to bringing justice.
Yeah, and I'll say, since we didn't Google, and we should have ahead of time, and this is all so new, and I know we get a lot of emails, believe me, listeners, we really do, and I apologize to anyone that I have not emailed back. The inbox is so full, and we run a lean ship because we are an advocacy show, so I apologize for not getting back to every email that comes in, but if you want to email us, info@mhnrnetwork.com, because something is happening to you, we will email you the best places we know of to go and call and get help, like the suicide hotlines that are out there. I'm not saying that that's where we would send you, but places that you can call and have someone get on the phone with you and help you figure out what to do next. We will do that for you to the best of our ability. We will, do that to you. So we will do that for you. So, we should have done some Googling, but like I said, this is new. I don't know that there's a national hotline to report this kind of stuff, but boy, we will find it, Google it, and try to send it out.
And if you got wounds from harassment in childhood or in adulthood, I welcome you to the Meier Clinics. I don't want to sound commercial, but
no, I was going to say the same thing, Paul.
1-800-CLINIC,
yeah,
or MEIER, www.meierclinics.com. We've got a national chain, and we have a day program where people come 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks, and they just pour their hearts out, and we dig and probe and put an empty chair in front of them and put the abuser in the empty chair, and we do Gestalt things and cognitive behavior, and we really help bring healing to men and women who have been abused in the past. And so we invite you to come to our clinics to get healing too.
Fantastic. Good. I'm glad you said it, Paul. I was going to say it too. We do actually know of a great place that you can go that is in many states that can help. So yeah, I always send out at the top of the list always is your Catalyst program. So definitely people visit that program, and we've way gone over, but that's what happens with this topic. So I'm going to say, Paul, again, thank you for coming on and doing this one tonight.
Sure. And I'm happy that there's a movement.
Me too.
There's a revival.
Absolutely.
There's a revival. That's right.
And Melanie, my cannot do what I do without you person, and one of my best friends in the world. Thank you for coming on and doing this too.
My pleasure. As always. So nice to share with you guys. Get passionate about stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, most of all, thank you to our listeners. My God, it's been a long journey with you, with us. And we just appreciate so much that you listen, that you email your feedback, and that you keep tuning in. So we honor you on your journeys, and we thank you for joining us for another edition of Mental Health News Radio. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meier Clinics, please visit our website at meierclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.